The family album they never wanted to open. I never thought a cardboard box could change everything. It had been sitting untouched in my mother's attic for nearly 20 years, sealed with yellowed packing tape, its corners dented and soft from time. The words, "Dio no open," were scrawled across the top in thick black marker, as if that alone could stop time from catching up to us. But time doesn't care about warnings. It slips through doorways, it hides in smells, in music, in the sound of a voice that hasn't spoken in years. And when it finally breaks through, it doesn't knock, it shatters. Growing up, I believed my family was ordinary. Messy, loud, opinionated. But ordinary. We had our Sunday breakfasts, our summer camping trips, and our gallery of photos along the hallway, birthdays, graduations, weddings, all locked in frames like trophies on a shelf. My mother liked everything neat. She was a master of surface control. Dinner set exactly at 6, beds made military tight. Every smile in every picture held just long enough for the flash. But I didn't understand back then that neatness can be armor, and sometimes the cleanest homes are the ones hiding the most. It started with a phone call. My older brother Liam, whom I hadn't spoken to in almost 5 years, called me out of nowhere. His voice sounded like gravel and guilt. He said Mom had taken a fall. Nothing major, just a bad bruise on her hip, but the hospital wouldn't release her unless someone could stay with her for a few days. I lived the closest. He was across the country and, let's be honest, emotionally farther. I drove over that evening with a duffel bag and a heavy heart. Mom wasn't the type to ask for help. Seeing her frail and flinching at every movement, with her sharp tongue dulled by pain, felt like watching a fortress crumble. I made soup. I fixed her tea. She didn't complain, which terrified me more than if she had. The second day, I started cleaning out the attic. Not because it needed it, but because I needed to do something. Anything. That's when I found the box. At first, I nearly respected the scrawl. Dio no open sounded serious enough, but the box seemed to hum with secrets. Like it had been waiting for decades for someone too curious or too foolish to follow directions. The attic was cold and smelled like old pine and insulation. Dust danced in the slanted light like memories trying to find form. I slit the tape. Inside were photographs. Hundreds. Some black and white, others with the faded tones of the 80s and 90s. But they weren't the ones I knew. These were faces I didn't recognize. Weddings we hadn't attended, birthdays we hadn't celebrated. And tucked between them were letters. Dozens of them, written in a looping cursive that wasn't Mom's. Signed, "Your sister, M." I stared at that signature for a long time. Mom never mentioned a sister. Neither did Liam. In all our family stories, our childhood myths, there was never a sister M. I started reading the letters. They were tender, often heartbreaking. Descriptions of loneliness, of wanting to reconnect, of waiting for a response that never came. The last letter was dated 1994, the year Dad died. Something cracked open in me. I wasn't angry yet, just confused. Confusion is like a low fog. It makes everything unfamiliar, like you're not sure if what you're seeing is real or imagined. I put the box back under the eaves, but it followed me. Every conversation I had with Mom felt different. Her eyes looked away more. Her silences stretched longer. That night, I took a walk around the neighborhood. The air was cold enough to make my thoughts sharp. I thought about how we're trained to believe that family is a stable thing, a structure we can return to. But what if it's not? What if it's scaffolding held together by lies, by things left unsaid? When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and waited for morning. At 6:15, just as the sun turned the window glass orange, I asked her, not gently, not cruelly, just directly, "Who is M?" Mom didn't answer at first. She sipped her tea, her hands shaking. Then she looked at me, and in that moment, she looked very, very old. "My sister," she said. "She died. But not the way people think." I didn't push. She began to talk. And I listened. She was born in 1948, 4 years before my mom. They were close, almost twins in spirit. They wore each other's clothes, whispered secrets through walls, ran barefoot through cornfields behind their farmhouse in Vermont. But then something happened in 1967. Something that turned my grandmother cold, my grandfather silent. Em ran away at 19. And my mother, bound by shame and silence, never spoke to her again. Until the letters. But the letters weren't answered. My mom said she couldn't risk it. Back then, things weren't forgiven. Families dissound. That was just how it was. And when Em died in 1994, from what, she didn't say. Mom boxed everything up and wrote those 3 final words. Do not open? I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her and shake her and ask how she could erase a person like that, an entire life. But I didn't, because deep down I understood. We all have boxes we don't want to open. Some we tape shut so tightly, we forget they ever existed. But the thing about buried things is, they don't stay buried. They fester. They whisper. In the days that followed, I kept going back to that attic. To the letters, to the photos. I started scanning them, labeling them, building a timeline. I needed to understand who Em was. And as I pieced her story together, something shifted. I saw how much of our family history was built on absence. On covering up instead of confronting. On performance instead of truth. I called Liam. Told him everything. There was silence on the other end. Then, I think I remember her, he said. A woman who came to see us once. I thought she was a neighbor. She gave me a train set. He paused. I was 5, that we decided to meet. Go through the letters together. Ask Mom the rest of the story. But we never got the chance, because the next morning, the police were at the door. They stood on the porch in uniforms too crisp for the hour, one tall and solemn, the other short and avoiding eye contact. I knew before they even spoke. You don't need words when the air around someone carries the shape of bad news. I let them in. My mother had died in her sleep. Peacefully, they said, like it was some kind of consolation prize handed out when everything else was lost. Peaceful, alone, and forever unanswered. That was the truth. I sat there while the short one filled out paperwork and the tall one kept looking around like my house might reveal some clue about who we were. They didn't ask about the attic. They didn't ask about the box. Why would they? Liam arrived 2 days later, red-eyed and reluctant. He had always carried guilt like a shadow, even when there was no cause. Seeing him now, I realized we both did. We were built in a house where apologies were silent, grief was hidden behind casseroles, and emotions were folded neatly into photo albums that only ever showed the smiling parts. I told him about the box, about the letters, about Mom's half-confession. We stayed up till 3 a.m., reading them out loud like campfire stories, each one flickering with heartbreak. There was one that stopped us cold. Dated September 17, 1986. It was longer than the others, messier. The handwriting was rushed, bleeding into the lines, as if Em was trying to outrun herself on the page. It read like a confession and a plea, all at once. She mentioned someone named James, said she saw him again, that she didn't know how to live with what they did. She begged my mother to write back, even if it's just to say you hate me. I looked at Liam. He looked at me. James. That was our dad's name. It felt like the floor dropped. Like every certainty I'd ever known, even the broken ones, suddenly turned liquid. I reread the letter 3 times, each time slower, tracing every word like it might suddenly change meaning if I looked at it just right. It never did. Em knew our father, not just knew him. There was a history there. A buried current that suddenly surged to the surface, dragging everything else with it. We didn't speak much after that. There are moments when silence becomes a kind of language, one too fragile for words. We buried Mom the next week. A small service, closed casket. A minister who didn't know her pretended he did, and people we hadn't seen in years said all the usual things. She was a rock. She always kept it together. She loved you so much. Maybe all of that was true. Maybe that's the most terrifying part. After the funeral, I went back in the attic one last time. I had this feeling, like if I could just find one more piece, one more scrap of truth, I could stitch the story together. Underneath a stack of old coats, I found a small notebook, red leather, locked but the clasp was brittle with age. I broke it open with a screwdriver. It was a diary, not M's mom's. The entries were scattered, erratic. Some were no longer than a sentence. He stayed out late again. The phone rang, but no one spoke. She sent another letter. I didn't read it. But in between the fragments were the things she never told us, the things no framed photo could show. She had loved James deeply, but something broke between them after 1986. She mentioned M often, usually with bitterness, sometimes with grief. But one entry hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. November 3rd, 1994, M is gone. I told them she wasn't my sister. I said I didn't know her. What else could I have done? James made me choose. I chose silence. That was the year M died. That was the year my father passed from a sudden stroke, or so we were told. But now the story no longer fit. Nothing did. I copied the entry and showed it to Liam. He read it 3 times, just like I had. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, what if she wasn't just Dad's past? I knew what he meant. What if M was something more, not just a sister? What if she was part of us? The idea seemed insane, but then everything we thought we knew was unraveling like an old sweater. I called the Vermont Department of Health, asked about a death certificate for a woman named Margaret, maybe Margaret, born in 1948, died in 1994. It took them 3 days to call back. There was a match. Margaret Lillian Harper, cause of death overdose. Unclaimed body, buried in an unmarked grave near Montpelier. I booked a flight the same day. Liam didn't come, said he couldn't. I understood. Not everyone is ready to dig up ghosts. Some of us are just better at pretending they never existed. But I had to know. I rented a car and drove through icy Vermont roads, trying to picture the 2 little girls running barefoot through cornfields. I couldn't make it real. It was like trying to imagine a dream you've only ever been told about. The cemetery was small, cold, half forgotten. I found the grave with the help of a groundskeeper who didn't ask questions, just pointed to a patch of grass marked only by a number 218B. I stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Then I read the letters out loud, every one of them. It took 2 hours. The wind never stopped blowing. I left a photo, one of the family album rejects I'd found in the box, and was laughing in it, hair wild, holding a baby. I don't know who the baby was. Maybe me, maybe Liam, maybe someone else entirely. But there was love in that picture, and that was more truth than anything we'd been told. Back home, I did something I never thought I would. I took a DNA test. Weeks passed. I almost forgot about it. Life went on, or pretended to. I was brushing my teeth when the email came in. Subject line, your results are in. I clicked. The match at the top wasn't Liam. It was a name I didn't recognize. Emily R. Estimated relation half-sister. I stared. For minutes, hours, I'm not sure. I messaged her through the app. Just one line, did your mother's name happen to be Margaret Harper? She replied in 5 minutes. Yes. Who are you? I sat there, toothbrush still in hand, and let the reality settle. M hadn't just known Dad. She had a child, a Domily, my half-sister. It explained everything. Why Mom stopped answering the letters, why she never mentioned M, why Dad left so often, why our family always felt like it was built on a fault line. Emily and I spoke for the first time that night. She grew up in foster care after her mother died. Never knew her father. Had spent years searching for answers. Neither of us expected the answer to be each other. We met a week later. She looked like a ghost from our family photos, only real. Her eyes were shaped like lions. Her laugh was exactly like my mother's when she used to let her guard down. We sat at a cafe for hours, filling in the gaps. She showed me a photo her mother had kept in a worn wallet. It was of a man holding a baby. The man was Dad. No mistaking it. When I showed it to Liam, he said nothing. Just nodded, as if the final puzzle piece had finally locked into place, and now all we could do was sit back and stare at the full picture. Terrible and beautiful all at once. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never opened that box. If the attic had remained sealed, the letters unread, the truth buried. But the thing about families is, they're like puzzles made of stories. Leave one piece out, and the whole thing feels incomplete. We thought our family was one thing, but it wasn't. It was something else entirely. Something messier, sadder, but maybe, in the end, more honest. And the twist: Emily wasn't the only surprise in the results. There was another match. Same generation, same father. But it wasn't a sister, it was a brother. And he was still alive. I didn't believe it at first. Another sibling. It felt like someone was testing how far I could be stretched before snapping. A half-brother, the report said. Matching paternal DNA, high confidence. His name was listed as Andrew K., 37 years old, living just 2 towns over. Not in another state, not across the country. Right here, practically in the same postal code. I reread the results, trying to decipher what kind of man he might be from a few lines of genetic code and an IP address. Nothing prepares you for finding out your family tree has an entire limb you never knew existed. I showed the result to Emily first. She stared at the screen, her eyes narrowing as if the name might jog a memory buried deep. "Never heard of him," she said softly. But that doesn't mean much. She had grown up without stories, without answers. A blank slate carrying the weight of someone else's silence. We decided not to contact him right away. Not because we didn't want to, but because the truth had already felt like a whirlwind and we needed to plant our feet before walking into another storm. Meanwhile, Liam pulled further away. I could feel it in his voice, in the way he no longer asked questions, as if discovering these siblings somehow erased what we had left. I wanted to shake him, remind him we were still brothers, no matter what new DNA might say. But that's the thing about people who've spent their lives keeping things buried. They don't dig easily, even when the shovel is in their hand. So I waited. I let the knowledge simmer like a secret stew, waiting for the right moment to serve it. And that moment came one rainy Thursday afternoon when I found myself parked outside a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Andrew's house. I didn't mean to go there. I was supposed to be grocery shopping, but my hands turned the wheel without asking permission. I sat there, watching the windows, half expecting someone to peer out and accuse me of trespassing on a life I had no claim to. The house was neat. Too neat. Trimmed hedges, symmetrical flower beds, wind chimes that didn't move in the rain. A car in the driveway, a faded child's scooter on the porch. I didn't get out, just watched. 10 minutes. 20. Then the door opened. A man stepped out. Broad shoulders, dark hair, phone in one hand, keys in the other. He looked like someone I should have known my whole life. But I didn't. I left before he saw me. Cowardly, maybe, but it felt like opening the box all over again. You peel back one layer, and there's always another underneath, more tangled, more fragile. I told Emily. She wanted to write him, she said. We have a right to know. He does too. She wasn't wrong. But we'd seen what silence had done to Mom and Em, how secrets curdled inside people until they poisoned everything. So I agreed. We wrote the letter to get an email. A real letter, handwritten, folded carefully, placed in an envelope with no return address, just in case he decided to reject it all. We told him the truth. About Mom, about Dad, about the attic, the letters, the test. We didn't ask for anything, just offered what we knew, and left the door open. 2 weeks passed. Nothing. Then late one evening I got a text from an unknown number. It read, "You don't know what you're stirring up. Stop." Just that. Nothing else. My heart hammered. I called Emily. She hadn't received anything. Liam swore he didn't send it. I thought maybe it was a mistake, or maybe Andrew didn't want to be found. But something about the wording, "You don't know what you're stirring up," felt colder than rejection. It felt like a warning. The next day, I went back to the attic. It had become a habit now. Like returning to the scene of a crime you never meant to commit. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just comfort in old dust and silence. But I found something. Beneath the box of letters, under the slats of warped wood, I noticed something stranger, a seam, a shallow gap between 2 boards. I pried it up. Inside was a narrow compartment with velvet that had long since faded to gray. And in it, another envelope, no name, just a dated August 29, 1987. Inside was a photograph, a grainy Polaroid. Mom, Dad, and a baby. Not me, not Liam. A baby I'd never seen before, maybe 6 months old. Mom was holding him, but her face was turned away from the camera. Dad was smiling, not the camera smile I knew, but something else, proud, tender, raw. And on the back, in my mother's handwriting, were 4 words: "He said it's done." I stared at that line until it stopped being words and started being sound. A low, humming dread. He said it's done. What was done? Who was that baby? I took the photo to Emily. She didn't recognize the child, but something in her face shifted when she saw it. "That's not our house," she said. "Look at the wallpaper. That's not where we grew up." So we started digging. Property records, rental histories, old mail we found tucked in the back of Mom's filing cabinet. And we found it. A rented cabin in the woods, registered in Dad's name from May to September 1987. No one ever talked about it. No photos, no stories. But there it was, in black and white. We drove for hours into the forest, along winding roads that narrowed into gravel. The cabin was still there, run down, windows broken, ivy curling into the roof like fingers trying to pull it back into the earth. The door creaked open with a sigh. Inside, the walls were peeling, but the bones were the same. 1 bedroom, a fireplace, a nursery, yes, still intact, a crib, a mobile that had rusted into stillness, a rocking chair with a threadbare cushion, and on the wall, faint but visible, were letters written in crayon A and D on. I dropped to my knees. Emily sat in the rocker, silent, her eyes locked on the wall. That was where he lived, before they gave him up, or hid him, or whatever "he said it's done" was supposed to mean. We left that place different than we entered. Haunted, yes, but not by ghosts. By the weight of a truth too big to carry, too ugly to ignore. The next day I received another text. "You went there, you really shouldn't have." This time, there was a number attached. I called it, straight to voicemail, a male voice. "Controlled? Leave it alone," he said. "You're not ready?" But the thing was, Emily insisted we confront him. She said if we didn't, we'd be just like them, hiding, pretending, taping our lives shut with warning labels. So we went to his house. And this time we knocked. He opened the door slowly. His face registered surprise, then a flicker of something else. Recognition, maybe, or dread. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said. His voice was the same one from the voicemail. He let us in. The living room was simple. Bookshelves, a child's toy on the floor, a framed photo of him and a woman smiling. "I'm Andrew," he said, "but I wasn't always." He told us the story, his version. He was born in August 1986. His mother was Margaret, our aunt, but she hadn't planned to keep him. There were complications, legal, medical, emotional. Dad stepped in, paid for everything, promised to take care of it. But then something changed. Margaret wanted him back. Dad refused. Said it would destroy everything. So they compromised. For 1 summer, she lived in the cabin with the baby. Dad visited, brought supplies, money. And then, one day, she was gone. Overdose, they said. Andrew was placed into a closed adoption. But Dad didn't stay away. He found him again, years later. Helped with school. Set up trust funds. Made sure he had what he needed, but never told him the truth. Until now. "I always wondered why I didn't fit," Andrew said. "Why I looked like him. Why I never felt like I belonged to the people who raised me." We sat in silence for a long time. Then Emily reached into her bag and pulled out the photo from the attic. He took it, looked at it. "I've never seen this before," he whispered. But his voice cracked. And I knew he had. Knew it in the way people know the scent of their childhood without ever naming it. We didn't leave that house as strangers. Not anymore. But we didn't leave as family either. Not yet. Because just before we stepped out the door, he said something that stopped me cold. "There's one more box." And he knew where it was. It was buried deep beneath a floorboard in his garage. Andrew knew exactly which one. Third plank from the left, just beneath an old shelving unit where rusted paint cans and tangled extension cords gathered dust. He didn't hesitate. Just got down on his knees, grabbed a crowbar, and started prying like he'd done it before. The wood gave way with a reluctant groan, revealing a cavity wrapped in a thick black garbage bag. Ducked, taped around the edges like something meant to never be seen again. It looked like trash. But nothing about it felt disposable. He laid the bag flat and cut it open with a utility knife, exposing a heavy metal box the size of a microwave. It had a built-in lock, but time had done its damage. The edges rusted, the latch brittle. Andrew hit it once with the flat of the crowbar, and the lock snapped loose like it had been waiting for permission. Inside was a stack of papers, some photographs, a few cassette tapes, and, almost absurdly, a baby blanket, yellowed and stiff with age. We carried it all into the house, spread it across the dining table like evidence. For a long time, none of us spoke. We just looked. At photos of Margaret holding Andrew in the cabin, her eyes shadowed with something hard to name. At receipts from motel rooms paid in cash under different names. At legal documents showing attempts to file for custody, stamped D&ID in block red letters. And most chilling of all, a spiral notebook filled with entries from our father. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, clean, mechanical. The notebook wasn't a diary, not really. It was more like a logbook. Lists of dates, meetings, calls. Occasional notes like M unstable, lawyer advised silence, contain fallout, no press. There was even a to-do list with one item circled in red ink. Secure guardianship quietly. Do not involve Helen, but Helen. Our mother. Andrew's face went pale. So she really didn't know? He whispered. We read every page. Cross-referenced every name and number. It was clear now. Our father had orchestrated everything. From Margaret's isolation to Andrew's hidden adoption. He had constructed a shadow life parallel to ours, managed it like a second family business. And somewhere along the way, something went wrong. Very wrong. On the last page of the notebook was a single sentence, written with shaky ink and a slight tremor in the line as, she knew too much. She wouldn't stop. We didn't know who Show was. Margaret. Someone else. But the implication settled like lead in our bones. We had thought we were chasing a story of secrets. But this was closer to something darker. Something dangerous. Emily found the tapes, labeled only with dates, no context. We didn't have a cassette player, but Andrew said he did. From college, he dug it out of a closet, blew off the dust, and slid in the first tape. The audio crackled to life, a low hiss, followed by voices. At first, they were just mundane. Dad speaking softly to someone. Maybe a social worker, maybe a lawyer. Describing Margaret's emotional instability, framing her as someone incapable of parenting. It was manipulation in its purest form. Polished, rehearsed, and devastatingly calm. The second tape was worse. It was a recording of a conversation between our parents. Mom's voice, tired, strained, repeating, "It isn't right, James. It's not right." Dad, colder than we'd ever imagined, said simply, "It's done. You need to stop asking." And then, more chillingly, "You don't want to end up like her." Emily stopped the tape. Her hands were shaking. I could see it now. Our mother's silence, her obsession with control, the way she compartmentalized her life into neat boxes and photo albums. She had been living under threat, not just of scandal or shame, but of something more personal. She had known, maybe not all of it, but enough to keep her up at night. Enough to tape that box shut and write Dio notat, open like a prayer and a warning at once. We didn't sleep that night. We sat at the kitchen table until dawn, surrounded by papers, unraveling decades of lies. We tried to build a timeline. Andrew's birth in 1986. Margaret's attempts at custody through 1987. Her disappearance and death in 1994. Dad's sudden stroke that same year. And then nothing, just silence. But one thing kept bothering me. A receipt from 1993, near the back of the box. It was for a private investigator. The name was smudged, but the address was clear. Brooklyn, New York. Dated just a few months before Margaret died. Why would Dad have hired an investigator then, so many years after Andrew's adoption? Unless someone had resurfaced, I called the agency. The name on the receipt, R. Nolan Investigations was still listed. An old man answered, raspy, irritated, until I mentioned the name James Harper. The line went quiet. Then he said, "You're not the first to call about him." He refused to say more over the phone, but agreed to meet. Brooklyn wasn't far. Emily and I drove there the next morning. Nolan was in his late 70s, thin as a rail, with a smoker's cough that punctuated every sentence. His office was straight out of a noir film. Filing cabinets, frosted glass, and the smell of stale coffee. He remembered our father instantly. Said he'd been a client in the early 90s looking for someone, a woman who was making threats, trying to expose a private matter. She was smart, he said, smarter than he gave her credit for. Tracked him to 3 addresses, even found his other car, wanted to go public. But then she vanished, just like that. I asked if he meant Margaret. He frowned. No, not her. Someone else. Younger. Blonde. Pregnant. Bob, pregnant. My stomach turned. We asked for a name. He flipped through a yellowed folder and pulled out a blurry photocopy of a driver's license. It was dated 1993. The name? Nina Caldwell. None of us had ever heard of her. She disappeared right after this was taken. Nolan said, no credit history. No job records. No family ties. Just gone. He handed us the file and told us to leave. Said he didn't want to be involved anymore. That ghosts like yours don't stay in the past. Oh, we read the report in the car. Nina had been 22, lived in a small apartment in Queens, worked at a bookstore. Last seen boarding a bus to Albany. After that, nothing. Emily sat frozen. What if Dad didn't just have one hidden child? She whispered. What if Andrew wasn't the end? The question burned like fire. We had been digging into a story we thought was tragic but contained. Now it felt like a bottomless well. How many lives had been rewritten? How many people were out there, walking around with our blood and no idea who they really were? We drove back in silence. That night, Andrew called. Said he had found something else, hidden in a false bottom of the metal box. A key, wrapped in a note with an address in Albany and one word, safe house. We met him there the next morning. The building was derelict. Long abandoned, its windows broken, graffiti covering every inch of brick. But the key fit the rusted lock of a basement door. Inside, there was nothing but a single filing cabinet, bolted to the floor. We pried it open. Inside were birth certificates, 3 of them. Not just Andrew, 3 different names, 3 different mothers, all linked by one thing, James Harper, our father. We staggered back from the cabinet like it had exploded. Emily was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't just hiding kids. I finished the thought for her. He was collecting them. And the worst part, we still didn't know why. We stared at the birth certificates like they were explosives. Fragile, dangerous, vibrating with the power to destroy everything we thought we understood. 3 names, 3 mothers, all born between 1983 and 1994. All listing James Harper as the father. But the addresses were spread across 3 states and none of the mothers had the same surname. The oldest child, a boy named Micah Flynn, was born in Ohio in 1983. The second, a girl, Ava Collins, 1989 in Connecticut. And the third, Nina Caldwell, born 1994, Albany. That name hit us like ice water. The last one wasn't the mother from the PI report. It was the child. Nina hadn't been pregnant when she disappeared. Nina was the pregnancy. The missing woman was her mother, which meant somewhere out there, maybe still living, was a now 31-year-old woman named Nina Caldwell, who had no idea that her father was a man with at least 5 children, a labyrinth of lies, and a secret so meticulously buried it had taken us months to scrape even the surface. I remember Emily reaching into the drawer for the final folder. She opened it slowly, like she expected it to scream. It was thinner than the others. A single page, hand-written in our father's unmistakable surgical script. If you're reading this, you already know too much, but not everything. We read on. He explained nothing, just hinted that there were things he did to protect the legacy. That some people were never meant to carry the Harper name. That mistakes had been made, but not by him. By the world, by women too fragile, to understand the weight of responsibility. The tone was detached, clinical. Not a confession, not a justification, just a record. Like he believed the act of writing it down made it true, no matter how warped. He ended it with a final line, a riddle really. If you want the whole story, find the ledger. Everything begins with the ledger. There was no explanation, no address, no hint. Just that phrase like a breadcrumb thrown into the void. We spent the next 3 weeks chasing shadows. Liam finally rejoined us. I think the weight of his own silence had begun to rot from the inside. He didn't say he was sorry. Just arrived one day with coffee and that haunted look in his eyes we'd all come to wear. He combed through bank records while Emily called every Caldwell she could find. Andrew tracked down an old family friend who'd once worked with Dad in the 80s. And Meek, I hunted libraries, archives, anything that could explain what this ledger might be. What we learned was unsettling. Our father had been part of a philanthropic board in the late 80s, the Elmwood Trust. On the surface, it was a scholarship fund for underprivileged youth. Dig deeper, and you'd find a network of wealthy men with a disturbing interest in genetic legacy. They funded fertility clinics, adoption agencies, even orphanages in the guise of benevolence. But something about the records didn't add up. There were gaps. Files marked confidential. Staff lists that shifted constantly. And then I found it. In a scanned newsletter from 1991, archived in a forgotten university database, was a single paragraph. We are proud to announce the launch of the Ledger Project, in collaboration with the Elmwood Trust. Designed to track longitudinal outcomes among exceptional offspring, this initiative will provide groundbreaking data for generations to come. My blood ran cold. Ledger wasn't a thing. It was a project, a study, and exceptional offspring. We knew exactly what that meant. Our father hadn't just fathered children. He'd been part of something. Something coordinated, clinical, predatory. These children weren't accidents. They were test subjects. Suddenly, things clicked into place. The secrecy, the control, the compartmentalized lives. If the Ledger Project was tracking outcomes, then all of us, Micah, Ava, Andrew, Nina, Emily, and me, were part of an experiment, a generational experiment. But who was behind it? Was it still active? What had they been tracking? Intelligence, behavior, genetics. Emily found Micah first. He was a school teacher in Ohio. No family listed. No social media. She sent him a letter explaining just enough to open the door without flooding it. He didn't respond. A week later, she flew there, waited outside the school where he worked, watched him walk to his car. She said he looked just like Dad. The same slouch. The same way of checking over his shoulder. But when she approached him, he froze. And then said the words that still echo in my mind. "It's not safe. You shouldn't have come." He left before she could ask anything else. The next day, someone broke into her hotel room. Took nothing. Left no trace. Just moved everything 2 inches to the left. Just enough to let her know they'd been there. We regrouped. Hid the documents. Changed numbers. Stopped emailing and went back to paper and burner phones. Paranoia became habit. Every shadow a threat. Every knock a question. But we didn't stop. We found Ava next. She wasn't hard to track. A biochemist at a government lab in Maryland. Her profile online was polished, sanitized. But her birth certificate matched the one from the box. Emily reached out. This time, more carefully. Ava didn't answer for weeks. Then, one night, she called from a blocked number. "I always knew," she said. "Not the details, but I knew I was part of something. They paid for my schooling. Sent me anonymous tutors. Every year on my birthday, I'd get a test in the mail. IQ, language comprehension, emotional regulation. I was trained without knowing it. Groomed, maybe." Her voice shook. "But the last letter I got was 12 years ago. It said the project had ended, that my data was complete. And then, nothing. We met her in person. She was fierce, guarded, but brilliant. And terrified. She had tracked her own half-siblings using DNA databases. Found at least 3 more she hadn't dared contact. She believed the Ledger Project had a phase 2. Something darker. Less about observation. More about selection. Think about it, she said. If phase 1 was about tracking outcomes, how we turned out, then what's phase 2? It's not about us. It's about what comes next: breeding, engineering, control. Suddenly our father's obsession with order, with hiding things, made sense. He hadn't been protecting himself. He'd been protecting the project, shielding its secrets from scrutiny, and maybe shielding us. Not out of love, but because we were property. And now, with him dead, the project had lost its handler. Or maybe it was waking up again. Andrew was the first to notice it. He started getting followed. A black sedan parked outside his job. Unmarked envelopes slipped into his mailbox. Blank sheets of paper inside. Once he came home to find his son's bedroom door open when it had been locked. Nothing taken. Just touched. Liam got it next. His phone tapped, his emails bouncing. Then an anonymous call. Return what you found, or we come for the next generation. That was the turning point. Until then, this had been about identity, history, filling in the blanks. Now it was about survival. We made a pact. A real one, not some sibling pinky swear, but a plan. A strategy. We made copies of the files, encrypted them, hid them in safety deposit boxes in 3 different cities. Ava built a private server off-grid. Emily moved apartments. Liam quit his job. I wiped my online presence. Andrew sent his family out of state. And then we vanished. For months, we were ghosts, living in the cracks, piecing together what we could. That's when we found the final clue. Ava accessed a closed medical trial database, old but poorly secured. In it was a list of names, subjects. Each name had a 3-digit code. All 6 of us were there, and next to each name, phase 1 complete, but only 5 had notes. The 6th, Nina Caldwell. It read, phase 2, activated. We had assumed she was like us, just another product of a bad man's choices. But what if she wasn't? What if Nina wasn't the youngest? What if she was the first? And what if she wasn't lost at all? What if she was coming for us? We had built a map. Not of places, but of connections. Red lines drawn between names, timelines, whispered facts, and broken truths. And at the center of it all, like a sun that never rose but only pulled us deeper into shadow, was one name: Nina Caldwell. For months we searched. She wasn't on social media, no trace in public records, no credit history, no tax filings. It was as if she never existed. And yet her name was everywhere in our father's legacy. Etched in silence, implied in threats, and finally confirmed in that single, chilling note from the database of phase 2 activated. What did that mean? We didn't know. But we were certain of one thing now. This story hadn't ended with Dad's death. It had only begun. And Nina wasn't hiding. She was waiting. Ava traced the IP address that had pinged the database. It led to a corporate shell in Geneva, masked through multiple proxies, all dead ends, except one. A forgotten domain, once registered by a tech firm Dad had consulted for in the late 80s. The firm's name, Petra Genomics. It had quietly shut down in 1996. We dug deeper. It turned out Petra Genomics had funded fertility clinics under different names across Europe and the US, specifically those linked to unusual genetic studies. The same clinics where our half-siblings' mothers had been patients. That's when it hit us. It wasn't just about Dad. He wasn't acting alone. He was part of something institutional. And he wasn't just their enabler. He may have been their prototype. Andrew found the breakthrough. On a medical forum for gene therapy trials, buried deep in a discussion thread about early behavioral conditioning, someone had posted a cryptic message. Phase 2 is already walking among you. She remembers everything. Ledger isn't data, memory. The account was new, no replies. But the IP address was traceable, barely. Albany, Nina's supposed birthplace. We went. Emily, Ava, Andrew, and me. Liam stayed behind watching over our encrypted backups. Ava had narrowed the signal to a community clinic operating out of a converted church. It looked harmless. A peeling sign, a cracked sidewalk. Inside, a waiting room with faded posters about vaccinations and flu shots. But the receptionist looked at us too long. Like she knew who we were before we even spoke. We gave false names, signed in as patients, waited, pretended to read magazines from 2014. After 40 minutes, they called us into room 6. It wasn't a doctor who greeted us. It was her. She looked to be in her early 30s. Tall, calm, eyes that didn't blink too often. She wore no name tag but didn't need one. "You're late," she said. No smile. We froze. She motioned for us to sit. The room was empty save for 4 metal chairs, no exam table, no equipment. Just a table with a small black box on top. Ava found her voice first. "Are you Nina Caldwell?" The woman tilted her head. Was. That name served its purpose. "Now I'm just the ledger." We stared. Her voice was smooth but without warmth. Not robotic, but deliberate. Every syllable measured like a scalpel. Andrew asked the next question, his voice hoarse. "What is phase 2? She opened the box on the table. Inside were photographs. Dozens. Our photos. Childhood, teenage years, recent ones. Some we'd never seen before. Private moments. One of Liam asleep at his desk. Another of Ava leaving the lab. A third of Andrew playing with his son. "You are all data," she said. "Han, data must be observed." But Emily stood. "Who's behind this? Who created you?" Nina, or whatever she had become, turned to her with something like curiosity. "You think I was created?" "No. I was allowed. Your father thought he could control outcomes. But he was the outcome. He and the others were just the first layer, intelligent, adaptive, obsessed with legacy. They thought they were the architects." She leaned forward. "They were scaffolding." It took a moment for the words to register. Then Ava whispered, "You weren't just part of the project. You are the project." Nina nodded. She explained everything. How Patrogenomics, funded by private investors and cloaked in philanthropy, had started the Ledger project as a long-term human experiment. The goal: engineer a generation of high-functioning individuals, gifted, adaptable, loyal. To what? Themselves. A new bloodline, a new control. Our father was recruited as an early Cedar Ba. His intelligence, his emotional detachment, his narcissism. They made him the ideal subject. He agreed to father children across multiple sites, using different vectors, relationships, artificial insemination, even coercion. We weren't accidents. We were parameters. But Nina was the variable. The one they pushed further. She wasn't just raised. She was programmed, conditioned from infancy, taught languages before she could walk, to need affection to enhance pattern recognition, monitored, upgraded. Phase 1 was about outcomes, she said. Phase 2 is about direction. But Emily asked the question we were all dreading. What's phase 3? Nina looked almost amused. She reached under the table and placed another item on the surface, a small vial. Clear, labeled P3X11. Phase 3 is distribution, she said. And it begins with choice. None of us moved. She leaned back. We've already seeded the infrastructure. Social media, apps, educational tools. Behavior shaping is no longer theoretical. It's operational. But Andrew's fists clenched. Why are you telling us this? Because you're not just remnants. You're founders. Whether you accept it or not, your names are encoded in the design. You were never meant to be observers. I spoke before I could stop myself. And if we refuse, her expression didn't change. Then you become obsolete. Phase 1 data has already been archived. You're no longer necessary for the project's continuation, but your silence or cooperation determines the conditions of your legacy. A long silence. Ava stood, took the vial, and smashed it against the wall. Glass exploded. Nina didn't flinch. You misunderstand, she said. That wasn't the only sample. We left and shaken splintered. Back in the hotel room, we debated what to do. Go to the press, the government. The problem was, we had no proof beyond what we carried. And Nina had made it clear they were always one step ahead. This wasn't science fiction. It wasn't madness. It was the future, and it had already started. That night, Liam called. He'd received a package at his door. No note. Just a flash drive. He plugged it in. Inside, a recording of our conversation with Nina. Every word. We were already compromised. So we did the only thing we could. We scattered again. Went dark. Each of us with a copy of the truth. And a message. If you're reading this, you're part of it now. That's why I'm telling you all of this. Not for closure. There is none. Not for justice. That's not how this works. I'm telling you because the ledger is still active. You've seen the patterns. The sudden shifts. The way certain people rise without cause, speak without doubt, follow without question. They were born from it, or into it. Maybe you were too. Check your DNA, check your memories, check your gaps. Because we weren't the first, and we won't be the last, but we may be the only ones who tried to stop it, before legacy became destiny, before Phase 4 begins. Thanks for watching the video, subscribe, and like the video.